The the Nikon D3s is probably the most important camera for any one camera company to be released within the last 20 years or so. I'm not saying it's the most important camera in all of camera history, but it's the most important camera for Nikon. This was a turning point for Nikon. Coming into the digital era, they were among the first DSLR producers to enter this market, and so they had a large chunk of that just naturally. But going a few years into the DSLR era, Nikon found them in really harsh competition with Canon, and comparing the Nikon D3s and D3s with the Canon 1D Mark II and 1D Mark II-N respectively, it was clear that Canon were leading this battle quite a lot actually, and it was clear that going into the future Nikon would have to see themselves competing with maybe a full-frame sports camera at some point. And Canon were really aggressive on the megapixel count as well. So coming into the third generation of professional Nikon DSLR cameras, they really needed to position themselves, otherwise they would be losing the photojournalists and the sports photographers, and probably the whole general professional photography market. So coming into the D3 series, Nikon really needed a win. And it turned out that Nikon not only had a win with the D3 and the D3s, they also found themselves in a position where Canon stumbled over their own feet in a pursuit to just constantly improve autofocus and megapixel count. I think nowadays it's not really commonly known, but the Canon 1D Mark III and Mark IV really sort of became an Achilles heel for Canon, because the Mark III had some focusing issues tracking a subject coming towards the camera. And the weird thing was that it wasn't really bad, it was just worse than the camera coming before it. It was less responsive. And I don't think the general photographer would ever know this, but this became a whole thing within photojournalism, and especially sports photographers. So there was a lot of disappointment when Canon didn't fix this with the firmware, and even more disappointment when the fourth iteration of the 1D series didn't actually fix this as well. So Nikon found themselves really sort of impressing the whole photojournalism business at the same time as Canon were just stumbling over their feet. So they were sort of given this win for a long time. It took Canon 6 years or something to pick themselves up and start over with the X series. What are they called? The 1D Mark X. The 1DX, the 1DX Mark 1, I don't know what they're called, but Canon eventually did step up and started competing with Nikon again. But it wasn't like it was too late, but it was Nikon had found themselves in the lead in this sort of photojournalism and sports photographer market, and Canon never really gained this first position again. They were, I think you could look at it like they were being equal at this point. The Canon cameras were always better than the Nikons, but also a little bit more expensive. But they were also not better in this way where you would consider changing system. I think that battle was lost, and Nikon had found themselves in a position where there was a room for them. So they didn't trash Canon completely. They sort of made this room for themselves. And that's why I think it's the most important camera for Nikon ever to be released. Because without the success of the D3 series, I think Nikon would have lost the sports photographer and the photojournalists. I don't think that would have been sort of fatal consequence for Nikon, but they would have found themselves where they would rely on an image being an enthusiast camera system, and they would have to restructure their professional market, their professional division, into focusing on different areas than photojournalism and sports. One thing I find interesting when I pick up a D3s today is that this is the first professional Nikon camera to offer video. Although it's 720p, and that was even low at the time. 4K cameras weren't around yet so much, but everything was HD, and it entered this with a 720p camera. It was sort of not really serious, so I don't think Nikon ever marketed this as being a video-centric camera, or even so. I've owned this camera since its release in 2009 or 10, and in all of this time I always considered this my workhorse camera in a way, and therefore when I look at the photos that I've taken with this camera over the years, none of them are like my best photos. Not that it's not capable, but it's always been this camera that was in my bag, my professional bag, and I would rarely bring it to anything personal. And a lot of the photos that I look back on today, they are sort of the personal project, or maybe the reportage somewhere or something. And the D3s were just rarely with me in these cases, but I still have a lot of love for the camera regardless, because it's just been this workhorse camera. It has proven itself this way, and it's still working, although it does start to have some flaws. The first sort of flaw that I found with this camera, it's sort of an aging flaw, is it has started to produce some bandings once in a while, and when I Google it, it's super rare, but it does exist. I've seen other people have it, and so when I found this, I contacted Nikon right away. At the time, they had sort of a Danish representative, and I mailed him some pictures, and he was like, oh, he recognized that as being a card slot failure of some sort, and he was like, just send it in and we'll repair it for free, even though the camera was already 10 years old at this point. But eventually, when I got the time to send it in, he was unfortunately laid off, and they had sort of shut the whole Danish division. So I don't think that agreement ever was relevant anymore. And because of this small flaw, I picked this camera out of my rotation of professional cameras. So that was in 19 or 18. So ever since then, I've only used it for personal projects or stuff like that. Another flaw that just started emerging is sort of a battery low voltage thing. Live view were working, but after a week or so it stopped working, and I couldn't figure out why. I thought that there was some circuit in some how do you say, some of the PCB boards were starting to fall apart or something, I don't know. But it turned out that it was because the battery was having a low voltage, or starting to show age. Although I can take 1,000 photos with it without even getting close to having to charge it. For some reason it shuts off the live view now, and that also makes it impossible to make videos with it. It's not a big problem, but actually wanted to make this whole video just with this camera for the sake of showing what a 720p looks like in 2026. But yeah, unfortunately you're gonna be stuck with this face in 6K. So when February ended and I decided to put this camera down again, it was with a little bit of a heavy heart, or how do you say, because every time that there's been a couple of years or a couple of months between me using this camera, one battery has died or something, and then another problem shows up or something, and it's just starting to show age in many ways. From a sort of mechanical point of view, things are starting to fall apart a little bit. So this time when I put it down, I'm a little bit like, I'm really sad, because if I pick it up in 2 years and the batteries are not working, I think I'm not gonna buy new batteries for it. So putting this camera down today and pulling the battery feels a little bit like saying goodbye to an old friend.